Usually when we talk about acquiring a new skill, there's this underlying expectation of like linear progress.
Right, yeah. It's like a straight lineup.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
stacking weights at the gym. You lift 10 pounds for a few weeks and then you graduate to 20, then 50, and the result is entirely obvious.
You get stronger.
Right, you get stronger. You can actually see the math working
Hmm.
in real time. You put in the reps, you see the muscle, it's visible, it's easily categorized, and honestly, it's a very comforting feedback loop. You always know exactly where you stand based on the numbers on the plates.
Yeah, that linear progression creates this psychological safety net for us. I mean, we are conditioned from a very young age, particularly in traditional educational systems, to believe in a direct, infallible correlation between input and output.
Oh, totally. Like studying for a test.
Exactly. You memorize 10 dates for a history exam, you get a certain grade. You memorize 100 dates, your grade improves proportionally. It's a purely additive model of learning. You are simply filling up a container, and, well, the fuller the container, the more competent you supposedly are.
But then you step into the world of advanced language acquisition, and suddenly that linear math just completely breaks down.
It really does.
The container model shatters. We start looking at a cognitive landscape that is, well, it's just a massive paradox. And that brings us to the core of what we are unpacking today.
Which is such a fascinating topic, by the way.
It really is. We're looking at a very specific, incredibly frustrating developmental trap that catches advanced language learners, specifically those hitting the C1 level.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to look at the exact cognitive shift required to break free from it. So consider the case of a learner from our source material named Nathan. His situation just perfectly illustrates this trap.
It's the classic scenario.
Yeah. So Nathan has a massive English vocabulary. We're talking thousands upon thousands of words. He is not like a casual weekend hobbyist. This is someone who has put in serious grinding hours.
Right. And the sheer volume of vocabulary he possesses places him in a very distinct category. I mean, he has conquered the initial brutal uphill climb of language learning. Acquiring thousands of words requires an immense amount of declarative memory formatting.
A lot of flashcards.
So many flashcards. He has likely spent years mapping English words to his native language, building this colossal internal dictionary. On paper, by all traditional academic metrics, Nathan has done everything correctly.
Right.
He has the raw materials, but the conflict at the center of his experience is just devastating.
Yeah, because every time he actually tries to speak, native speakers just look at him in total confusion.
Which has to be so demoralizing.
The psychological frustration inherent in that dynamic must be overwhelming for you if you're in that position. At the advanced level, learners inherently assume that vocabulary acquisition is the ultimate metric of success.
Because that's what we're taught.
Exactly. We are taught from day one that words are the fundamental currency of language. So Nathan has this massive bank account, but when he tries to spend that currency in the real world, the transaction just fails. The native speakers are just staring at him, completely lost.
And this immediately dismantles the pervasive myth of vocabulary as the sole driver of fluency. We often view a language as a static repository. The assumption is that if you just, memorize the dictionary, if you download the entire database of words into your brain, you will achieve fluency.
Right, just load it up like a hard drive.
Exactly. But Nathan's situation proves that knowing the individual components of a complex system is not the same as being able to operate that system. The native speakers aren't confused because Nathan lacks the specific vocabulary word to describe his thoughts. They're confused despite his vast vocabulary.
Wait, really? So it's not a lack of words?
Not at all. His problem isn't a lack of resources, it's a fundamental failure in the deployment of those resources.
It makes me think of structural engineering. It's like Nathan has spent years acquiring a massive pile of incredibly expensive, beautiful bricks. Thousands of them.
Oh, I like that analogy.
But he has absolutely no mortar. He has no cement, no architectural blueprint for how the bricks are supposed to bear weight. He can stack those bricks as high as he wants. He can proudly point to his massive pile. But without the connective tissue to distribute the load, the structure's just going to collapse.
It's going to fall right over.
Yeah, and anyone walking by and looking at that pile of rubble is going to be completely confused about what he was trying to build. He might point and say, "Look, a house." But all they see is a hazardous pile of clay on the ground.
Spot on. The structural integrity is entirely absent. In linguistic terms, he has the semantics, the meaning of the individual words. But he is lacking the syntax and the pragmatics required to bind them together.
The mortar.
The mortar. Right. The listener's brain is attempting to walk into the linguistic house he is building, but the walls are caving in because the foundational rules of physics, or in this case, the rules of English sentence structure, are being violated.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, though, because, wait, if I go to Paris and I just desperately string words together, like train where, is, fast.
Right, the tourist approach.
Exactly. People understand me. They point me to the station. If Nathan has the exact words needed to describe an object or an action, even if the structure is a bit wobbly, shouldn't the listener at least get the gist? Why the total, complete confusion from the native speakers if he's using the right vocabulary?
Well, the difference between your Paris example and Nathan's situation is the complexity of the intent. When you are operating at an A1 or A2 survival level, your communicative goals are highly concrete and immediate.
Like finding the bathroom.
Right. You are asking for directions, ordering food, or locating a bathroom. The context does most of the heavy lifting for you. If you are standing in a train station with a suitcase and you say, train, where? The listener's brain uses the environmental context to instantly bridge those syntactic gaps.
Ah, I see it.
But Nathan is operating at the C1 level. He isn't asking for the bathroom anymore. He is trying to express complex, abstract ideas. He might be trying to explain a nuanced political opinion or a subtle joke or like a complex professional strategy.
Things that don't have visual props.
Exactly. At that level of abstraction, environmental context can no longer save you. The structural integrity of the sentence has to carry the entire weight of the meaning.
Ah, so the blueprint actually matters when you're trying to build a skyscraper, whereas you can just kind of throw a tent together.
Precisely the issue. And this brings us to the diagnostic intervention that reveals exactly why Nathan's skyscraper is collapsing. His teacher sits him down and asks him a very simple yet incredibly piercing question.
Oh yeah, this part of the source material is great.
She asks, how do you make sentences? She isn't asking about his grammar exercises or his vocabulary lists. She is directly questioning his cognitive assembly line.
Right.
She wants to know the exact manufacturing process he uses in his brain before he opens his mouth.
And Nathan smiles, probably thinking he has this highly logical, foolproof system. He reveals his internal process. He says, I translate from my language one word at a time.
And the teacher immediately identifies this as the root cause of the structural failure. Translating word for word is a catastrophic error at the advanced level because human language is not a one-to-one cipher. It is not a simple mathematical equation where, variable X in Spanish or Japanese always perfectly equals variable Y in English.
Because you aren't just swapping out the labels on the jars. You're bringing the entire shelving system from the old pantry into the new kitchen.
I love that. Yes, you are dragging the entire architecture of your native language into the new environment. When you translate word for word, you are carrying over your native grammar, your native syntax, the cultural idioms, and the historical context of your mother tongue.
All the baggage.
All of it. And you are forcing English words to behave according to those foreign rules. You are treating English vocabulary as if it were just a different font for your native language.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's ground this in a concrete example so we can really see the mechanics of this failure. What actually happens in the brain when someone does this?
Okay, let's look at how different languages handle a really simple concept, like age. In English, we treat age as a state of being. We say, I am 30 years old. We use the verb to be.
Right.
But in Romance languages, like Spanish or French, age is treated as a possession. You say, tengo 30 años, or j'ai 30 ans, which literally means I have 30 years.
Okay, I track.
So, if a native Spanish speaker translating word for word tries to express their age in English, they will say, I have 30 years. Now, for a simple sentence like that, the native English listener can probably decode it, but scale that up to a C1 level argument about, say, macroeconomic policy.
Oh man, the errors would just compound exponentially.
The compounding effect is exactly what causes the listener's confusion. If the speaker is constantly using English words but Spanish or Japanese sentence structures, placing verbs at the very end of the sentence, using prepositions that don't map correctly, applying gendered logic to neutral objects, it creates a linguistic Frankenstein.
A Frankenstein sentence.
Yes. It has all the parts of an English sentence drawn from Nathan's massive vocabulary, but the skeleton holding it together belongs to an entirely different species.
And from the listener's perspective, this must trigger some sort of cognitive alarm bell.
Oh, absolutely. It triggers a massive disruption in predictive processing. The human brain is, at its core, a prediction engine. When a native English speaker listens to someone talk, Their brain is constantly subconsciously predicting the next word based on the rules of English syntax.
So we're kind of anticipating what they're going to say before they say it.
Exactly. So when Nathan places a word in an order that violates those unconscious rules, the listener's predictive engine just derails. The brain literally registers a spike in cognitive load, what neuroscientists actually measure as an N400 or P600 event-related potential.
Wait, really? There's a measurable brain spike?
Yes. The listener is expending so much energy just trying to parse the bizarre syntax that they completely lose the thread of the actual meaning. The confused look that Nathan sees is just the external manifestation of a native speaker's predictive engine crashing.
That is wild. Think about this like playing a piece of music. Imagine a beautiful, complex piano sonata. If you sit down at the piano and you just play the individual notes, the individual words mechanically translating each note on the sheet music to a key on the board, but you completely ignore the rhythm, the tempo, the phrasing, and the pauses.
It's just noise.
That sounds like noise. The native speaker is listening for the melody of English, the natural rise and fall, the prosody, but Nathan is just aggressively hammering isolated keys in a rhythm dictated by a completely different song.
That's a perfect way to put it. In music, the emotional resonance is found in the phrasing and the spaces between the notes. By translating one word at a time, Nathan is obliterating the melody of English. He is treating the language purely as a cryptographic code to be cracked, rather than a living, breathing system of expression.
But wait, I want to explore attention here. If translating one word at a time is so destructive, why is it the universal starting point for almost every language learner? I mean, when you start out, you literally hold up a flashcard with a picture of a cat on one side and the word gato on the other.
True.
You were explicitly taught to build that one-to-one translation bridge. So why does this fundamental survival tool suddenly become a massive liability at the C1 level?
Well, because the cognitive requirements of the task fundamentally change as you advance. At the beginner level, translation is your necessary life raft. You don't have enough data in the target language to infer meaning from context, so you must tether every new piece of information to the existing scaffolding of your native language.
You're just trying not to drown.
Exactly. You are building a semantic bridge. But as you progress towards C1, the complexity and speed of communication demand efficiency. The cognitive processing power required to generate a complex thought in your native language, locate every corresponding individual word in English, sequence them according to your native grammar, and then vocalize them. It introduces a massive computational delay.
Oh, it's like routing your internet connection through a server on the other side of the planet before it reaches your computer. The latency is going to make real-time interaction impossible.
Yes. The latency destroys the conversational flow. And more importantly, as we discussed, it guarantees syntactic errors because the one-to-one mapping breaks down completely when you deal with idioms, phrasal verbs, and complex clauses. The life raft of translation eventually becomes a cage that prevents you from swimming freely. To reach fluency, you have to cut the tether.
You have to ditch the life raft.
You have to undergo a fundamental paradigm shift in how you generate language.
Which brings us to the pivotal advice Nathan's teacher gives him. She delivers a philosophy that requires a complete rewiring of his approach. She tells him, instead of translating every word, you have to think about the meaning. Stop asking, how do I say this in English? And start asking, how would an English speaker naturally express this idea?
And the psychological distance between those two questions is vast. On the surface, they appear to be asking the same thing, but they represent entirely different vectors of cognitive processing.
Let's break down that distance.
Yeah.
Because when I hear, how do I say this in English? It feels very natural. I have a thought, I want to say it. What is fundamentally wrong with that starting point?
When you ask, how do I say this in English? Your point of origin is still locked inside your native language. You have already fully formed the sentence in your mother tongue. The architecture is already built in your head.
Okay, yeah.
You are looking inward, taking that native structure and attempting to force it into English clothing. You are making the target language submit to your native thought patterns.
Oh, I see. It's the difference between trying to perfectly dub a foreign movie so the mouth movements match the new audio versus just letting the actors perform the original script of the language.
Oh, that's good.
When you translate word for word, you are dubbing the movie of your mind. It always looks a bit jarring, the timing is always slightly off, and the dialogue feels stilted. You're trying to force English to sync up with Spanish or German mouth movements. But when you ask, how would an English speaker naturally express this idea? You are throwing away the dubbed script entirely.
You are shifting your focus outward onto the natural ecosystem of the target language. You are no longer looking at the specific words of your native sentence. You're isolating the raw, pre-linguistic concept, what cognitive scientists sometimes call mentalese.
Mendelese.
Yeah, it's the pure intent or emotion you want to convey before words are even attached. Then you scan the English language for the most natural vehicle to carry that intent. You are not asking for a translation of words, you are asking for the cultural and linguistic equivalent of the idea.
But how do you actually do that in practice? Because if I am feeling hungry, the raw idea of hunger feels inextricably linked to the word hungry in my brain.
Yeah.
How do you separate the raw pre-linguistic concept from the vocabulary list you've spent years memorizing? Can we actually think without words?
We do it all the time, we just don't notice it until language fails us. Have you ever had a complex feeling or an abstract thought, and you struggled for a few seconds to find the right words to explain it, even in your native language?
Oh, sure, like it's on the tip of my tongue.
Exactly. That gap between the thought and the articulation proves that the concept exists independently of the words. The challenge for the language learner is to hold on to that pure concept, inhibit the urge to attach their native vocabulary to it, and instead reach directly into their English database.
That sounds intense.
It requires active suppression of the mother tongue. It is a process of linguistic ego death. You have to stop being a native speaker who is merely borrowing English words, and you have to allow the target language to dictate the structure of your thoughts.
Okay, this sounds incredibly abstract. It's a beautiful philosophy. But if I'm Nathan, sitting at my desk on a Tuesday night with a textbook, how do I actually execute this linguistic ego death?
Well, you execute it through rigorous, highly specific changes to your daily practice routines. You cannot just decide to think in English through sheer willpower.
Right, you can't just flip a switch.
Exactly. You have to mechanically rewire the neural pathways in your brain through habit. And so Nathan adopts 3 specific actionable methodologies to force this shift. First, he starts learning phrases instead of single words. Second, he dramatically increases his listening. And third, he actively refuses to translate.
Let's pull apart that first methodology, learning phrases instead of single words. Why is chunking language so much more effective than memorizing isolated vocabulary?
It directly solves the Frankenstein problem we talked about. When you memorize a single, isolated word, you are learning it in a vacuum. You have no data on its collocations, the other words it naturally partners with. You don't know its grammatical environment.
Man, it's like trying to learn how to cook by only studying individual ingredients in isolation. If you memorize the chemical properties of raw flour, a cracked egg, and baking powder, you technically know the components of a cake. But if you just throw them in a bowl and eat them raw, it's going to be disgusting.
Exactly. Nobody wants to eat raw flour.
Right. Phrases are the actual recipes. They show you exactly how those ingredients are meant to be combined, in what proportions, and in what specific order, so that the end result is actually digestible.
And just as importantly, learning recipes saves you the time of having to invent baking from scratch every time you enter the kitchen. In cognitive psychology, there is a concept called working memory limit.
Okay, what's that?
The human brain can only hold a small number of items in its active working memory at one time, often cited as around 7 items. If you are building a sentence word by word, every single word, every preposition, every conjugation rule takes up a slot in your working memory. Your cognitive load maxes out instantly. But the brain has a brilliant workaround called chunking.
Where it groups multiple pieces of information into a single unit.
Exactly. When you learn a phrase like, by the way, I was wondering if, you are not memorizing 7 different grammatical units. You are downloading a single prefabricated chunk of meaning. It only takes up 1 slot in your working memory.
Wow, that's so much more efficient.
It is. Native speakers do not build sentences word by word from scratch. Corpus linguistics reveals that up to 50% of natural native speech consists of these formulaic sequences, these pre-built lexical chunks. We are simply retrieving large blocks of pre-assembled language and snapping them together.
So when Nathan switches to learning phrases, he is massively reducing his cognitive latency. He isn't agonizing over whether to use in, on, or at because the preposition is already baked into the phrase he memorized. He just pulls the entire pre-furnished room out of his brain and places it into the conversation.
He is adopting the natural efficiency of a native speaker. But to know which phrases to learn and how they actually sound in the wild, he has to engage in the second pillar of his new routine. He has to listen more.
Now, this is where I think a lot of highly motivated Type E learners get tripped up. Because when you are desperate to achieve active fluency, when you want to speak and debate and be understood, Listening feels agonizingly passive. It feels like you aren't doing the hard work of drilling flashcards or doing grammar exercises. Does increasing your listening input actually accelerate active output?
Yes. The perception that listening is passive is a profound misunderstanding of neurobiology. Listening is an intensely active process of statistical learning. When you immerse yourself in the natural audio ecosystem of the target language through podcasts, audiobooks, or unscripted conversations, your brain is acting as a massive pattern recognition engine.
Like it's taking notes in the background.
Exactly. It is subconsciously tallying the frequencies of word combinations. It is tracking the intonation patterns. It is building an internal probability model of what sounds right.
You're absorbing the data necessary to answer the teacher's question.
Right.
How would an English speaker naturally express this? You can't guess the answer, you have to observe it.
You cannot infer the natural phrasing of a language purely from its grammatical rules. For example, in English, we say strong tea, but we don't say powerful tea, even though strong and powerful are synonyms.
Wait, yeah, powerful T sounds so weird.
Right, a grammar book cannot explain that to you. It is purely a matter of conventional usage. The only way your brain learns to intuitively select strong tea and reject powerful tea is by encountering the phrase enough times in natural input that the statistical probability in your neural network heavily favors the correct pairing.
That makes total sense.
This passive listening is exactly what builds your intuitive, gut-level grasp of the language. It shifts your knowledge from explicit, rule-based memory to implicit, automatic memory.
It's the difference between staring at a map of a new city versus actually walking the streets. The map is your grammar book and your vocabulary list. You can memorize the grid, but you won't know where the traffic jams are, you won't know which alleys are safe, and you won't know the shortcuts the locals use until you spend hours just walking around observing the flow of the city. Listening is walking the streets of the language.
That was perfectly said. And once you have walked the streets enough, you no longer need the map. Which brings us to the most difficult but most crucial third pillar of Nathan's methodology: translating less.
Burning the ships.
Cutting the tether entirely. Translating less is the active enforcement mechanism of the paradigm shift. It requires incredible discipline. When you encounter a new concept or a word you don't understand, the immediate, overwhelming urge is to look up the direct translation in your mother tongue. It provides instant gratification and a false sense of security. Translating less means resisting that urge.
So what do you do instead? If you don't know the word and you can't translate it, aren't you just stuck?
You force yourself to navigate around the obstacle entirely within the target language. You use an English-to-English dictionary. You look at images. You use circumlocution,
Which is
describing the object or concept using other English words you already know. If you forget the word for thermometer, you don't translate it. You say, the tool used to measure temperature. By doing this, you force the brain to build direct neural pathways between the abstract concept and the English language, completely bypassing the native language bridge.
you are intentionally stranding yourself on the English island. You are forcing your brain to adapt to the local environment rather than constantly importing supplies from home.
Initially, it feels excruciatingly slow. The cognitive friction is high because your brain is desperately searching for the efficiency of the old translation bridge. But neuroplasticity is driven by demand. When you repeatedly deny the brain access to the native language translation, the neurons begin to wire themselves directly to the English concepts. In neuroscience, this relies on Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. By forcing the English word to fire at the exact moment you are conceptualizing the idea, you forge a direct link. You eventually prune away the intermediary step.
This completely changes the trajectory of Nathan's progress. In the source text, we jump forward in time to see the result of this rewiring. The timeline here is fascinating. It says, a few months later, his English sounded smoother, more natural, and far more fluent. A few months, not a few years. Not after acquiring another 10,000 words.
The condensed timeline is the ultimate proof of the concept. His actual vocabulary, the raw inventory of words, likely didn't expand significantly in that short period. He already had the necessary components. What changed was the routing system in his brain.
He organized the warehouse.
He optimized the retrieval process. By abandoning the word-by-word translation, he smoothed out the Frankenstein syntax. By learning in phrases, he dramatically lowered his cognitive load, allowing him to speak at a natural pace. By listening more, he absorbed the prosody and rhythm, so his speech finally sounded like the melody that native listeners were expecting. The friction of communication just dissolved.
He went from banging on isolated piano keys to playing the actual sonata. He finally realized that C1 English isn't a metric of how many dictionary definitions you can recite. True C1 fluency is a cognitive state. It's about thinking in ideas, learning in phrases, and aligning yourself with the grain of the language.
And this realization exposes a massive flaw in how we structurally assess language proficiency on a global scale. If true fluency is a cognitive state of natural expression, we have to recognize that almost all standardized testing, university entrance exams, professional certification tests fundamentally measures the exact opposite.
Oh, absolutely. The testing industry is built on the translation trap. They test your ability to fill in isolated grammatical blanks. They test your ability to read a complex text and parse the vocabulary. They measure your pile of bricks.
Standardized tests are designed for objective grading, which means they heavily index on explicit knowledge, vocabulary size, and rigid grammatical parsing. They reward the learner who can treat language like a mathematical equation, but they cannot easily measure the procedural, implicit knowledge of how naturally a candidate constructs a spontaneous idea.
Right. They can't test if you're actually thinking in the language.
Exactly. This is why you see an epidemic of learners who hold C1 or even C2 certificates, who have passed all the written exams with flying colors, but who experience crippling anxiety and failure in actual unscripted conversations. The test rewarded them for building the Frankenstein monster, and reality punished them for it.
Which is why this mindset shift is so incredibly liberating. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped on that intermediate plateau, if you are exhausted from grinding Anki decks and flashcards for 2 hours a day, but your real-world conversations are still halting, clunky, and filled with awkward pauses, Nathan's breakthrough is your blueprint. You are not failing because you aren't working hard enough. You are failing because your cognitive assembly line is optimized for the wrong outcome.
You are allowed to stop trying to force your native language's architecture onto your target language. You can step away from the brute force memorization of isolated data points.
You can put the flashcards down. Start focusing on the music of the language. Immerse yourself in the natural flow of ideas. Pay attention to the chunks, the phrases, the recipes that native speakers use to navigate their daily lives.
And what is most powerful about this transition is that it honors the learner's energy. It stops demanding that you constantly fight against the current of the language by trying to control every single variable, every single preposition, every single word choice from scratch. It invites you to surrender to the statistical patterns of the language, to observe, mimic, and ultimately adopt the natural thought processes of the people who speak it. It is a shift from heavy lifting to elegant navigation.
It is the shift from being a decoder of data to a true communicator of human intent. To bring this all together, for you listening, we explored the paradox of the advanced learner who possesses thousands of words but zero structural integrity. We broke down exactly why word-by-word translation causes massive cognitive traffic jams for both the speaker and the listener by dragging incompatible native syntax into a new environment.
The old Frankenstein sentence.
Yeah, exactly. We discussed the profound philosophical pivot from asking, how do I translate this, to how would a native speaker express this idea? And we unpacked the rigorous daily habits required to force that neural rewiring. Chunking language into phrases, absorbing the statistical probability of the language through massive listening, and actively cutting the translation tether to build direct conceptual maps.
It is a remarkable journey of cognitive adaptation, but this adaptation points toward an even deeper psychological implication that I think is really worth considering.
Okay, I'm ready.
If true fluency at the highest level requires you to stop translating entirely, if it requires you to actively suppress your mother tongue, dismantle your native scaffolding, and completely surrender to the idioms, the phrasing, and the structural logic of a foreign language, does undergoing that profound rewiring actually begin to alter your identity?
Oh, that is fascinating.
In linguistics, there is a concept known as the Horphian hypothesis, or linguistic relativity, which suggests that the structure of a language influences how its speakers perceive the world. So, if you successfully train your brain to think entirely within the ecosystem of a new language, bypassing your native language completely, do your humor, your emotional reactions, and your methods of argumentation fundamentally change when you operate in that language? When you finally achieve true C1 fluency and step into the cognitive shoes of a native speaker, are you actually the exact same person you are in your mother tongue?
That is an incredible question to chew on the next time you catch yourself trying to translate a sentence word for word. What part of yourself are you holding on to, and what are you willing to let go of to truly communicate? We want to thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the mechanics of fluency. Keep observing, keep thinking in ideas, and we'll see you next time.